check and make sure I was unmuted. He served 10 years in the Air Force as a commissioned officer, having joined shortly after the attacks on 9/11. Jewel and his wife are both real estate agents and operate their own agency. Jewel, please tell us more about yourself and your campaign for the U.S. Senate.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm very honored to be with you. As was mentioned, I did serve 10 years in the Air Force, and I am a real estate agent. My wife and I, we both have our broker's license, and I am a true moderate at heart. I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then you can see why I am the way I am. I'm the oldest of 18 brothers and sisters. That's 18, 10 boys, 8 girls. So as you can expect, my parents were super religious. They didn't believe in birth control. And you could almost say I was almost raised as a conservative. Most people thought my family were Catholic. My father happens to be a Baptist preacher, so they weren't Catholic, but they made us memorize not verses, chapters of the Bible every day. So my background was more conservative, but obviously, considering my skin color and, I'm blessed to be able to do what I'm doing based on the hard work of prior generations. My parents had a much tougher time than I ever had, right? And their parents had a much tougher time than what my parents had. So from a social perspective, they were more, as you would say, more to the left, more liberal. But from a religious perspective, they were more to the right. So I learned and I listened to them, and as I went and graduated and went to college and so forth, then I started to think more for myself. And as a result, I consider myself a true moderate. And what do I mean by moderate? What I really mean is what's reasonable, right? And the way I try to look at what's reasonable, because of course, that is in itself, subjective. There is some subjectivity to what's reasonable. So I ask myself 3 questions, and you will see this on my website. And this is one of my main points when I talk to people is, let's first start with what's legal. And I would add a parenthesis to that question by saying, not only are we asking what's legal, is it constitutional, but should it be legal, right? But we'll start with the law, because at least with the law, it's the most objective standard that we have, right? It is written down on paper. It has, we've had, lawyers and judges interpret it, right? There is a standard and a precedent. So the first question is it legal? Second question is it safe? And I appreciate the conversation that we had earlier about deferring to our public health professionals, right? They're not 100% perfect, but they've gone to school, they have the expertise, they have the experience. And essentially what we're trying to determine is what's safe for our community. And then the third question is it fair? And so as you can see, I'm not saying Jewel Kelly has all the answers. What I'm saying is we have a standard. We believe in principles. And I think that those 3 questions, if you could answer yes to all 3, that's pretty moderate. That's pretty reasonable. So I really wanted to take the time to share with you guys what I mean by saying I'm a moderate. Some people in this day and age, it's almost extreme to be moderate, right? People think you're just wishy-washy or you're in the middle of the road. And that's not what I'm talking about at all. Some things that are safe, believe it or not, if you listen to the other side, they think you're extreme. And you're not trying to be extreme at all. You're simply just trying to say, what's keeping us safe? So that's what I mean by, I'm a moderate. A little bit about my military background. I did join the military right after September 11th, 2 months. My exact day was November 20th. So it was, slightly over 2 months. And one of the things that got me into this fight now is about 3 years ago, my wife, unfortunately, we experienced a tragedy. She lost her daughter. I lost my stepdaughter to suicide. And as you can imagine, we went through the 4 stages of grief: shock, anger, depression, and then finally acceptance. And we didn't know what to do, but we knew we needed help. And we also knew that we didn't want another parent to go through what we did. And so we reached out to our friends, and we eventually formed a foundation called A Fighting Chance. And so it has a medical doctor, an attorney, a licensed professional counselor, a nurse. We have varied experiences. And through our foundation, we realized that there's a lot of training, things that we can do. And I was very pleased to hear that there's going to be a youth mental health discussion, because what we realized is that there is a youth mental health first aid class that's been available for years. We didn't know about it. And even if we had known about it, we would have thought parental bias, it doesn't apply to us. But what we found is if you have normal day-to-day people talking to each other, that's where change is made, right? So now, and it's fortunate and it's kind of unfortunate that every week, my wife and sometimes myself, she'll get someone to call her and say, you know, her name's Karen. Karen, my daughter or my son is saying this, or we saw this, right? And they trust her because they know that we've been through it, that we will not be judgmental, and that, you know, we're not going to accelerate the stigma. We will keep it in confidence. But the point is, there is training out there, right? And so when we started the foundation, I realized that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but funding is a huge issue. And of course, who sets the funds, right? That's those are the politicians. So I didn't think about running for Senate, but it was in the back of my mind. And then 2020 happened. And I call it the American grief, because our country went through the 4 stages of grief. We were shocked when we saw George Floyd being murdered and recorded, right? We all experienced a shock. It wasn't the first time, and unfortunately won't be the last time that someone is killed by police. But that event, it shocked the conscience. We saw the pandemic, and we suffered in on our own in silence, similar to what we did when we went through suicide. It was an individual thing because we were separated from each other, right? So the depression of going through that pandemic and knowing that it didn't have to be this way. And then January 6th, when we saw our country, our capital being attacked, everyone was angry, especially veterans. So I say America went through what in a different way, but similar to the 4 stages of grief that we've been through. And then here's the acceptance part. Nothing is going to change unless we change, right? Unless our politicians change, nothing is going to change. And unless more people step up to the plate, we're not going to have any different candidates. So I don't know how much time I have, Dave. I can go on and on, but I kind of wanted to go through the why, is why are you running, right? Well, it's because 2020 and the beginning of 2021 was like the year of no other. I joined 20 years ago to join the military because our country was attacked. I'm doing the same thing here, but just in a different way, right? My public service before was in the military. My public service now, I hope, is to be in politics. That's why I'm running. And I really think, regardless of whether I get elected or whether Scott Sifton gets elected or whether Lucas, if we have a reasonable standard and we're asking the questions, not what the Democrats want, not what the Republicans want, but is it legal? Think about Obamacare. The big question, everyone knew, the debate wasn't so much about whether it was fair or whether it was keeping us safe, because of course, the more healthcare, the more safe it is for the country. But the fundamental question, was it legal? And we've had Supreme Court case after Supreme Court case. So that's what I hope that we can get back to. We're drafting bills that we know will withstand. They're going to have challenges, but we know at the end of the day, the Supreme Court will uphold it because it really is constitutionally valid. And then, is it safe, right? Healthcare, I believe, is a right. We can have that discussion, but I think where we can get more moderates is to say, look, whether you believe the government should pay for it or not, what can we do to help people to become more safe? And this pandemic proved it. If you don't have healthcare, you're at a much higher rate or much higher risk of having something like the coronavirus take your life, right? Because you have unaddressed issues that you couldn't afford to take care of earlier. So, if we focus on what's safe, we don't necessarily have to agree to the letter, But if the direction is, yes, we do agree as a country that we want to be more safe, I think that we can get compromise. And then the fairness question, right? What's fair? And if you think about some of the things that the Democrats are proposing, which I 100% agree with, universal health care. How can you be more fair than to say everybody gets it? How can it be more fair than you say, we're not necessarily saying we're giving it for free. The government, we all pay taxes, right? So if we can frame our conversations based on whether it's just or legal, whether it's safe, right? And whether it's fair, I think we can find that common ground. Because here's the thing, in Missouri especially, even if we got every Democrat to vote, right, we're going to have a tough time winning, right, because of the recent shift to red. But if we can peel off some of those Republicans, because we know that there are responsible, principled Republicans that don't have a home right now, right? I mean, when you think about what's going on with George Bush, he wouldn't be elected, right? John McCain, Romney, even Senator or Representative Cheney, right? You see what's going on there. There are, and I have friends myself, I live in rural America, right? A lot of them are Republican. They're searching for a home. And so we don't necessarily attack the party. What we do is appeal to principle and to say what we're asking for is exactly what you're asking for. We may disagree on the details, but the direction is the same. And I think we can make a much stronger argument than saying things like defund the police. I'm all for mental health. If you want to increase mental health, say, I want to increase mental health, right? So that's the approach, that's the lane that I'm driving. And with your help, I appreciate it. I know that I haven't had the political experience of some of my, I won't say opponents, but some of those who are running with me, because no Democrat is an opponent for me. We're all in the same race. We're just all trying to get to the finish line first. So, but if you listen and if we work together, there are some ideas that I'm sure I will hear. And I was like, you know what, that makes sense. And I hope that there are some ideas that they hear from me. They say, you know what, Jewel might have a point there, right? And that's how we grow together. And that's how we send the strongest candidate, to go against what most likely is looking like, Eric Greitens, right? And so there's any Democrat candidate I would prefer over that guy. And so we, as a team, work together. We all are saying basically the same thing, but different styles of communicating. And I think if we focus on the principles, right, instead of the party, I really do think that we can get some of those Republicans that don't have a home. We may be able to get them to at least vote, with us for this election. So Dave, I'll stop now because I don't know how much time I have, but I'm definitely open to answering any questions or that you might have for me.
What I'm going to do, Kathy is moderating this part, so I'll let Kathy Jensen call on people to ask questions. So, and we're here until 1:15. Will that work for you, Jewel?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
All right. So we've got plenty of time for questions. So Kathy, I'll let you moderate.
Okay. Pam is unmuted. Do you have one?
I do. Jewel, I think it is really positive that you're from the rural area of Missouri. And tell me how you speak to those people. I think there are very few Democrats in rural areas. And I think that they're getting a lot of information from the wrong places that is not true.
So how I speak, honestly, it starts with listening, right? So the first thing that I want to do is say, tell me more, right? They're asking a question for a reason. Tell me more about that. So I'll give you an example. I was out at Cape Girardeau, and after I gave my canned stump speech, right, one of the gentlemen came up to me and he says, hey, you're a military guy, and I appreciate what you're doing in terms of promoting mental health for the military. But what about law enforcement? He says, in law enforcement, once you separate, there is nothing. The military has the VA. Now, and I thought about that, right? I mean, think about what he's asking. He said, what would you do? But I said, tell me more. He says, well, I really think that we need to when we're talking about mental health, we specifically need to address the lack of mental health for our law enforcement officers. And he says, I wouldn't stop there. He says, think about our tow truck drivers that arrive on scene. They see things that we should never, ever have to see, but they see it every day. And so my point is, how do we talk? And of course, this is rural America. How do we talk to them? We listen. We ask, tell me more. We listen. We try to understand why they're asking the question. And what you find out is, I grew up in a trailer park where it was black, white, we're all poor. Our differences are so much smaller than our basic everyday questions. We hear from the extremes on social media. We hear from the extremes on the television. But at the end of the day, what people really want, they want to be treated fairly. They want to be healthy. They want to have a fair shot at a job. Those are common things. And somehow we've let the extremes of both sides, I'll be honest, the Democrats, some of the things that we're doing are kind of extreme, right? And even if they're not extreme, we haven't done a good job of explaining the principle. And so I think talking to rural America starts first with listening, and not just listening to the question, but trying to understand, why is it a concern? And if I can understand why it's a concern, then I can truly tailor the message to address that concern.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, who?
Is that
Yes,
her? Yes.
okay. Where do you stand on the two major legislative initiatives of the administration, US administration, presented by President Biden in his 99th day speech to Congress?
And just to make sure, I took some notes on his plan, but just to make sure I answer your question, what do you think are the two most important? Of course, he's always talked about healthcare and the pandemic. So I don't know if when you say his two major initiatives, if you're talking about healthcare, if you're talking about the minimum wage, what specifically can I answer?
Two pieces of legislation which were specifically announced. One was the infrastructure plan.
Yes.
The other was the personal, what is the name of the other one?
Yeah, with the family care.
Family,
Yeah.
Those two pieces.
Yeah, so here's, I apologize that I'm looking down at my notes, but, I wanted to make sure that I got a summary of it. So his plan, the president's jobs plan, which, by the way, it's literally called the jobs plan, but everything you hear about the media is the infrastructure plan, right? And then there's a debate over whether or not it's true infrastructure or not. And I'm surprised because I said, well, the title itself, when you go to his website, when I went to his website, it actually says job plan. And so I think there's an opportunity for us Senate candidates to help reinforce the title that, yes, you can debate whether or not it's true infrastructure or not, but if it's going to create more jobs, that's a good thing. So basically the plan, it's $2 trillion over 8 years. And it has about $621 billion to repair roads and bridges and what we traditionally call infrastructure. Of course, I think that's a good thing. I mean, if you think about what happened right after the Great Depression, President Roosevelt and even Eisenhower later on after him, infrastructure was a big deal. And in rural America in particular, infrastructure is huge. In a former life and even today, I was amazed when I first drove from St. Louis to Festus, right? The first time I did that. I was surprised as I got further away from St. Louis as to how the roads were, right? And the further away you get, the more you see, rock and gravel, and it gets worse and worse. And so I 100% support it. I think it needs to be done. And I think the hard lifting really isn't President Biden. I mean, he's doing a great job of going around. It's us. We have to have a better message. We have to tailor it to the local communities to say, here's how this helps Festus. Here's how this helps the town that you live in, right? Because at the end of the day, if people can't see how it relates to them, they just turn on the TV and they see the talking heads and they watch and they look on social media and they'll think that this is truly a power grab from the left when that's not what it is. So I would 100% support the infrastructure part of it. And I love the focus that he places on schools. He talked about modernizing schools and having $100 billion to upgrade public schools. And then there's one thing, and then I'll stop for the next question. There's one point that he made that I thought was really crucial. He talked about the drinking water. Removing the lead from 100% of the lead from the drinking water. Think about going back to those three questions. Is it legal? Well, why wouldn't it be legal, right? Is it safe? Absolutely. And is it fair? He wants to do 100%. So to me, that passes those three questions. It's a reasonable, moderate request. I'm surprised that we haven't done it before, but we have to start somewhere. So yes, I am all in on it. I do think that we can do a better job of communicating the pros and the cons, but yes, it needs to be done.
Okay, Alice, you have a blue hand up on the participant list. Did you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to know where you stand on the filibuster, enlarging, so we could potentially enlarge the Supreme Court.
Yes, so I've studied this and I've seen both sides. And of course, the filibuster has been used to block a lot of legislation, especially, or infamously, a lot of the civil rights legislation. But here's the thing about the filibuster. The filibuster is one tactic, right? The real issue is whether or not the party that's in power, if they made a convincing enough of an argument to get the required number of votes, right? And the filibuster takes it from the 50% or 51, right, the majority, to where you have to have at least 60. And with that 60 vote minimum, it essentially forces the Senate to be more moderate, right? So in theory, in principle, I agree with the filibuster because you don't want one part. If there's ever a time when you wanted the filibuster, think about the last 4 years, right? Imagine if President Trump could have made anything possible that he wanted without the filibuster being in place, right? So the filibuster certainly worked during those 4 years, but now the shoe is on the other foot. Now the Democrats are in power and they're saying, wait a minute, if we don't have the filibuster, we could get some of the things that we want done. Great, wonderful. But what if we lose? What if the party changes over? Now we're in trouble, right? So at the end of the day, I think we need to do a better job of making better arguments. And I think we make better arguments by clearly articulating the policy that we're trying to propose, how that goes back to principle. And we get the American people involved so that those politicians that are on the fence, they wouldn't dare vote against it because they know when their time comes up, they're going to get thrown out of office, right? Right, fairness, safety, justice, those are winning arguments, right? The majority of the country isn't to the extremes. The majority of the country are reasonable people. But I really think that we haven't done a very good job of doing that. And the other thing, and here's something I'll say, our younger generation, we have to connect with them better, right? Believe it or not, my generation, Generation X, we're not the largest population in America anymore, right? The largest generation right now are the millennials, right? Because of course, the baby boomers, just because of age, they're going to the next life. So we have to be able to get our younger generation involved. And we're not going to do that by eliminating the filibuster. We do that by appealing to principles and doing it in ways that we listen to them and do it in ways that they're a part of the team. So that's what I hope to bring to this Senate campaign is, young people, Come on, this matters to you more than us because you're gonna most likely live longer. You're gonna be stuck with the results longer. So this matters to you. Go ahead.
Thank you for your response, but I don't think we're going to deal with giving people the ability to vote because of voter suppression laws across our country without passing the bill that Biden's proposing.
Yes.
And I don't see how we're going to pass it without changing the filibuster. But thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's going to be tough, but we have to be persistent, right? We cannot take no for an answer. And here's the thing. I was talking with one of my Senate, peers who's running for the Senate. And I said, in the military, we learn for every plan, you have a contingency plan. What if we can't get rid of the filibuster? Then what, right? If we base everything on getting rid of the filibuster and we get rid of the filibuster, great. We know that we can pass this bill. Wonderful. I'm all in. But what if we can't get rid of the filibuster, right? Then we're back to square one. We have to go back to the people and make a stronger argument, right? So I'm saying, why wait? Let's engage the people now, right? I honestly believe people are not stupid. It's not that they don't care. It's that we as politicians haven't done a good enough job of making the case. And I'll give you an example. Florida proved it. No one would have thought Florida would have elected 2 Democrat senators in 2020. But the Republicans actually made it easy for them because the Democrats made a simple argument. We are proposing $2,000, right, stimulus check during a pandemic. And the Republicans said no. So a reasonable person that isn't necessarily watching Fox News or CNN, they could realize which is the better argument, $2,000 during a recession or during a pandemic or not. And even Trump said that was one of the biggest mistakes that the Republicans made, but we won it on arguments. And because of that, we have 2 elected Democrats. So I haven't, it's very tough right now. I don't think that we can get 60 Republicans today or 10 Republicans to vote with us. But I think if we sharpen our arguments and make it crystal clear, this is what they're saying and this is what we're saying, I think the American people will make the right decision, regardless of whether we have a filibuster.
Okay, Caleb Hall first, and then Carl Sculler.
Thank you, Kathy. So real quick question. Well, I have 2 questions now. One is, you said Florida. Did you mean 2 senators from Georgia in 2020?
Yeah. Scott, John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock.
Thanks. And second question is, normally when a Democrat describes themselves as moderate, there are certain issues that they are wanting to distance themselves from either the far left or either a certain key issue in a state. Is that the same for you? Do you have certain key issues that you differentiate yourself from, say, the online left or the rest of the Democratic Party platform?
I think it's more in terms of the message and in terms of letting the standard be the differentiator versus the extremes, right? And so here's an example. And this may be controversial to some people, right? I talked about how I'm the oldest of 18 brothers and sisters. Okay, so take a guess. What do you think? Do you think my parents are pro-life or pro-choice, right? Now, here's how I look at it. And this is what I told my parents. And frankly, they don't necessarily see eye to eye with me. But I said, I thank God my mother had the choice and made the choice to bring all 18 siblings in the world. Think about that, right? So whether you are pro-life or pro-choice, my mom, she had us, right? She didn't have an abortion, but she had that choice. And so that's how I look at it. So in a way you would say, well, then you are pro-choice, right? I also think that we should work together to address the root causes that result in a pregnancy ending early, right? And we know that lack of access to healthcare is certainly one of them, right? We know that equal pay for equal work We know that women make far less per dollar than men. We know that the way we have our corporations and our companies set up, that once you take off work, it is harder to get back into the workforce and the promotions that associate with that. So I think that there is an opportunity where we can certainly respect life, and we can certainly acknowledge that, yes, part of a human right is the right to live, but we certainly cannot ignore the right of anyone to have a child, to not have a child, to raise a child. Those are human rights as well. Reproductive rights are human rights as well. So I see myself more toward the center, right? I'm not saying that, we should 100% have zero restrictions whatsoever. But I think at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that government has limits. We have limits as to what a government can do in a home. And we certainly have limits, and we should certainly have limits as to what government can do or not do inside of a person's womb, right? There are limits to government. And so I think that's an example. There's nothing more politically hot than abortion, right? I mean, that if you talk about something that really gets people fired up, that's one. But I think that Democrats can do a better job of getting those moderate Republicans to say, look, we can work together to address the root causes of that causes an abortion to end early. So I think that that's an example of where I would consider myself moderate, right? At the end of the day, I'm absolutely not saying take away a woman's choice, because I'm so glad my mother had the choice. I would hate to say, you know what, your mom only had you because she was forced to have you. I mean, think about that, right? I know that she had me because she had the choice. She wanted to have me. That's true love. So I hope that answers your question, and I hope you can kind of see how I think and why I consider myself a moderate versus, to the extreme right or to the extreme left.
No, that does help. Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Carl?
Yeah, thank you for taking advantage of the invitation here and appearing. My wife wanted to ask one question, so I'll offer that one first, and then I have one. And she was wondering, where in rural Missouri do you reside? And then let me ask my question, and that is, you've talked a little bit about the abortion question, one of the big questions, and actually, mercifully, I think the issues have been veiled with infrastructure and something else, but obviously the big ones are still guns, God, and gays when it deals with the urban-rural kind of divide. And just to comment on the end of this, with respect to the filibuster, the Republicans were very successful in removing the filibuster when it came to the judiciary. That's not something that the Democrats have yet been willing to delve into. But what about the guns, gods, and gays issue and message to rural America?
Okay, I'll answer the easy question first. I live 3 miles south, 3 miles south of Festus in Jefferson County. So I don't know how familiar you are with Jefferson County, but and I live outside of Festus, so it's rural. I mean, you can't get more rural than that, but that's where I live. In terms of guns, God, and gays, I believe, and this is probably my favorite verse, there is no fear in love, right? And what do you mean by that, right? What I mean is, I know that love is patient, love is kind, love treats a neighbor as itself, right? So it's saying you're not partial, right? You treat everyone the same. You treat people like the way you want to be treated. So let's go down the line, right? Let's start with gays. Why would I want someone to say, because I have a belief, and I happen to be Christian, right? But let's say you believe in, another religion, you can't do what you want to do because of my religion, right? That's not fair, right? It doesn't matter whether I think it's right or wrong. That's not fair, right? Not to mention, if you go, is it legal? Is it safe? Is it fair? Start with the Constitution, right? Start with amendment, the First Amendment, and you can go through all the amendments, right? Start with separation of church and state. So that's what I think, right? We as politicians, we're not priests or religious leaders, right? Our job is to uphold the law and to make sure that that there's equal protection under the law. So in one sense, someone can say, well, Jewel's not a moderate in that regard. You're right, right? There is no compromise in whether or not you're going to love your neighbor as yourself. There is no compromise in terms of being fair, right? That to me is the center, right? That fairness is the center, right? So in a way, that's what I think about that. In terms of guns, is it legal? Is it safe? Is it fair? Let's start with the Second Amendment. The US Constitution says that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, here's the good thing about laws, even including the Constitution. Any law can be changed, but until it's changed, it is the law, right? So if someone says, Jewel, would you vote to, overturn the Second Amendment? Well, there's a process for that, right? 3/4 and all of that. And do I think that that's going to happen? No. But here's where I think we can make a difference. There was an interesting article. Mental health is very big to me, right? Suicide awareness, the deaths by guns are exploding. And the idea was, think about this. Think about if we took our mental health, I wouldn't even say arguments, but facts to gun owners. And we said, look, you guys have an opportunity. You see the person coming in to buy that gun. What if you were trained where you could look at the signs and you could help identify that this person may be at risk, right? Think about how that changes the argument. Instead of saying, we don't want you to have a gun, which, oh, by the way, as long as we have the Second Amendment, we're going to have a tough time taking guns away from people, right? But think about, the goal is not to take your gun. The goal is to save lives. And how can we work together to save lives? We don't necessarily have to take guns away from people to save lives, but we do have to address the root causes. And some of those are mental health, some of it isn't, but some of those are mental health. We do have to do a better job of doing that. And I think that we can get reasonable Republicans on board with us. So that's what I think about, guns. I think that as Democrats, we need better arguments. We need to go on principle. And in those cases where we need to change the law, but do it the right way. Until we change the law, I think the Democrats will continue to lose. That's what I think. And so to change the law, especially to change the amendment, it takes an extreme amount of popular support. And you don't get that popular support without having reasonable arguments. In terms of the background checks, that's something that America, the majority of America, I believe was almost 90% agrees with. That's a law I think we can put back into place. I 100% support that, right? So, I think part of what our job is to start small to go fast. I think sometimes we have all these ideas and, we lump them together and the Republicans methodically chip away to the point that we have nothing. But I think something as specific as the universal background check, if we were smart enough and we have the right people to stand on principle, I think we can get that done. I think that's a law that we can get changed that will help save lives.
Thank you. And then it's Nancy and Wiley after Nancy.
Okay, my question is, what was your major in college? What did you do when you were in the service? And why did you choose real estate as your career?
Oh, these are fun questions. So I have 3 degrees. My undergrad degree was in communication. So that helps in politics, right? And then I have an MBA, right? A master's in business administration. And then I have a second graduate degree from Washington University School of Law in legal studies. So those are my degrees. My undergrad was from the University of Illinois. And then my master's in legal studies from Washington University School of Law. Why I chose real estate, I didn't think of real estate initially, but my wife, it's something that she had been thinking about doing for 25 years. And when she mentioned it to me, she says, she's a physical therapist, by the way, assistant. And she was going into people's houses and it was pretty tough. And she was like, Jewel, you would just be amazed as to how some of these people's, the conditions that they're living in. And she was getting worn out. And I was like, well, you obviously know the community, you're in people's houses anyway. So I thought she would make a pretty good real estate agent. But she was kind of dragging her feet and she, wasn't really taking real estate seriously. So I said, you know what, I'll show her, I'll do it, right? So I wasn't even, again, I didn't even think I would really like it, but I was like, instead of telling her what to do, I'll do it myself. And so I took the test, passed it, helped her study. She took the test, passed it. And then what we learned is that we loved it. In real estate, unlike politics, imagine this, guys. Imagine if you didn't get a dime unless the bill passed, right? Imagine if you didn't get a dime unless the results that you were going after actually happened. That's how it is in real estate. We don't get a single penny unless the deal closes, right? So all those skills that I had learned before, the communication skills, the negotiation skills, the contract skills, all of that came into play, the marketing, right? And not to mention, I get to work with my wife every day. So it was a beautiful thing, and we got to grow our business and so forth and get out and meet people and all that. So I love it. I just wish I had thought about it 20 years earlier, but I'm glad that, that she loves it. Matter of fact, that's where she is now. She's closing a deal. So yeah, it's been fantastic for us. I absolutely love it.
Wiley?
Oh, and I think you asked
Very
what
good.
did I do in the military. I cross-trained. I started off in personnel, which is like human resources, and then I cross-trained into aircraft maintenance. And so basically, my job was to supervise a team of between 50, depending on how large the flight or the squadron was, 50 to 200 people to launch aircraft. So once that plane touched the ground, our job was to make sure that it was good to go, had all the inspections, everything was ready to go so that the planes took off on time. So I did that for 7 years. I deployed twice in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And my last duty station was Guam. So I spent 3 years overseas, and then I did 7 years stateside.
Mr. Kelly, I'd like to get your reaction to several foreign policy issues, if I may. First, the president has decided to withdraw troops from Afghanistan by September 11.
Yes.
What do you think of that decision? The president is attempting to negotiate with Iran to reinstate the treaty with Iran. What's your reaction? The tensions with China appear to be increasing. What views do you have relative to how the United States should engage with China?
Yes, so I'll start with the first one. The decision by President Biden to withdraw all forces by no later than September the 11th, 2021. It's personal to me, right? Because that was the very reason why I joined the military. And it's hard to believe that that was 20 years ago, right? My daughter wasn't even born, she's 18 now, before, when that happened. And 20 years later, we're still there. I remember my uncles were talking about the Vietnam War, and I had 3 uncles who were Marines. And it was a war that we didn't win, right? It was probably the first war that, is widely acknowledged that we didn't win. Now, the military did what they were sent to do, right? It was not, we didn't win the war because the military didn't execute. We lost the war because of policy, right? And what I think about the war in Afghanistan, I go back to why we were there. This country was attacked. We know who attacked us. Osama bin Laden attacked us. President Obama captured and well, the military under the orders of President Obama captured and killed Osama bin Laden. And Al-Qaeda, which was the terrorist organization responsible for executing those attacks on us, they've been decimated. Now, the war will still continue whether we're there or not, right? Even now, there's been intelligence saying that Afghanistan is on the verge of a civil war. There are certain things that a foreign country cannot do for another foreign country. I believe it is impossible to force another country to accept democracy. You cannot force democracy, right? Democracy in and of itself has to be by the people, for the people. Now, we can try to help, but you cannot force. And so I think that's where we lost our way. I was 100% behind the war. I personally served when the objective was to go get those guys that slaughtered 3,000 Americans. But once we did that, I think we kind of lost our way in terms of trying to establish democracy. You cannot force democracy. If they want our help, we'll give them our help. But we're not going to try to impose democracy on another country. So that's my thought. I think it's the right decision. 20 years is a long time. And just because we don't have boots on the ground doesn't mean that we don't have the capability to do what's necessary to protect us, right? I know that. I serve America. We have technology and we have intelligence where we can do what we need to do, but we don't necessarily need to leave our troops there in Afghanistan indefinitely. So that's what I think about that. In terms of the China situation, I think that China has continued to grow because they haven't made the mistakes that we've made. They haven't engaged in a 20-year war to enforce their style of government on someone else. So I think that we are, in a way, we're watching the rise of China and we're looking at some of the mistakes that we've made and we're saying, wait a minute, China is catching up. And the only way we can make sure that we remain the greatest country on earth is that we don't make strategic errors that we've made in these last 20 years. The war in Iraq, think about, are we more safe now than we were when we invaded Iraq? And it cost us $2 trillion and it cost us over 4,000 American lives, right? China didn't do that. China didn't make those mistakes. And then if you think about how they're, it's no secret, the Republican administration and the Democratic administrations, they all acknowledge that China is stealing intellectual property, right? So if America can do all the heavy lifting and figure out how to make some of the best products in the world, and then another company just comes and steals it, well, yes, they're going to be they're going to have an advantage. So I think that we definitely have to be tougher in terms of how we protect our intellectual property. I think we have to draw the line as to, again, going back to, is it legal, is it safe, is it fair? There are definitely human rights issues going on in China. Unfortunately, there are human rights issues going on in America as well. But, we still, as long as our principles are what's guiding us instead of our policy, I think we have the credibility to stand up to China when we need to and work with China when we need to as well. And then lastly, in terms of the treaty with Iran, look at the results. When President Obama signed the treaty with Iran, the deal was to reduce the number and to reduce the Iran nuclear capability. And then of course, President Trump took us out of that treaty and they continued to do what they were going to do. So I say, look at the results. I would be closer to what President Obama acknowledged than what Trump did. But I think, the real answer is probably somewhere in between. And I'm not a foreign policy expert, but as a senator, the first thing that I would do is bring in the experts and go through what do our treaties say, right? I don't believe we should sign a treaty and then just because we don't like the political party, withdraw from that treaty. it better be a really legal reason to do that. And by the way, these treaties are ratified. They have to be ratified by the Senate. And the Senate, of course, looks at international laws and so forth. So I think, in terms of whether or not I would sign a treaty, I would start with what's legal, what's going to keep us safe. And of course, the proliferation of nuclear weapons doesn't keep us safe. So the goal, the direction that we're trying to get is, how do we bring down that so that we are a more safe world, right? So that's the goal. And then you have to think about what's fair. Every country has a right to defend itself. Now, do you need to defend yourself with nuclear weapons? That's open for discussion, but we have to be sensitive to the fact that any country is going to look at the United States and say, you have nuclear weapons and you don't want us to have nuclear weapons, right? How is that fair? And so we have to be honest with ourselves and say, that is the case. How do we address that? How do we make it more fair, right? And so that's what I think. It is a very complicated issue, but I think we definitely start with the laws. The laws were not just made by the United States. The League of, the United Nations, they have those laws for a reason. And I think that that's the start, and then we go from there. What's going to keep our country safe? What's going to help keep the world safe in terms of nuclear weapons? And then what's fair? And I think you work from there. It's a very, very tough issue, but you have to have the right experts at the table, regardless of political party.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any more blue hands. Is there anyone else that wants to ask a question?
The last thing I'll say then is this. Most Democrats, the majority of what we're proposing, we agree on. The question is how. And how do we pay for all of these things? And I think if we take a reasonable approach, is it legal? Is it safe? Is it fair? And I think one of the things that we can look at, we really only have three ways to pay for these things. We can either raise revenue, we can either cut costs, or we can do a combination of both, right? And in terms of raising revenue, and I talk about this, it is not socialism to reverse the tax cuts 1 or 2 or 3%. And I think we have to be very careful with our language. Raising taxes, of course, no one wants to raise taxes. But if you frame it as reversing tax cuts, that's a better argument. Because here's the thing, if they're saying it's socialism, is it communism? Well, in 1930, were we a communist country? In 1930, were we a socialist country? Of course not. So if 1930 and taxes were much higher than what President Biden is proposing, it was not socialism, then why is it socialism today, right? So we have to address the lie, and we have to be very precise with our messaging, but realize that no, reversing tax cuts is not socialism. The other thing that I would say is we have discretionary spending and non-discretionary spending, mandatory spending. If we look at our discretionary spending, 50% of that goes to the military. I'm a military guy. I'm pro-veteran. I love the military. But if you think 50% goes to defense spending and the rest of the departments, education, healthcare, labor, justice, all of those are fighting for the rest of the 50%, something is wrong here, right? So I think that there is an opportunity, especially as a veteran, as your messenger, to say, look, our budget can be more fair. Our budget can be more safe, right? Why are we spending 50%? What if we reduced it to 40%? By the way, reducing the discretionary spending for the military by 10% is about $67 billion. Did you know that if you took $67 billion and put it to the Department of Education, you would double the Department of Education, right? So go back to the fairness question, go back to the safety question. What keeps our country more safe? And the other thing I'll say real quick, because I know we're at time, we've got 2 minutes, is this. The Department of Defense can negotiate, let's say, I'm an Air Force guy, so an F-35 is a fighter aircraft, it costs $100 million. What if the Department of Defense said, no, this is where my real estate negotiation comes into play. We're only going to pay you $90 million instead of $100 million. Oh, you don't like it? Well, then I'll go to the next company. You give us what we need for 90 million instead of 100 million, right? The point is we can negotiate better. Why don't we? Because we know that the CEOs of those companies, they're paying the politicians to approve that budget, right? So the only way we stop the politicians from doing that is transparency. It's by explaining the budget in clear, concise ways to say, guys, here's the budget, here's the pie. 50% goes to the Department of Defense. The rest of our budget, our non-mandatory spending goes to all of these other departments. This isn't fair. This isn't safe, right? We can do a better job. And so we really have to do the heavy lifting with informing the American public how we spend our money and that there is a better way to do it. So I think that there is a way to pay for all these programs by reducing our costs and starting with the military, by increasing our revenue, right? But it's not socialism. And we have to attack the Republicans. We have to attack the lie. This is not socialism. This is not communism. This is moderate. This is reasonable. And here's why. Thank you.
Carl or Maury have their hand up again too.
Just one brief comment, and as co-chair of the Muleskinners, I wanted to thank you for accepting our invitation to speak. And I will say in closing, just one comment, and it's refreshing to talk to someone or to listen to someone who has thought about and anticipated some of the questions that we've posed. It really is. So I appreciate it very much, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very